The man who turned rappers into hundred-millionaires couldn't save himself. On a warm night in the Bronx, while hip-hop's greatest stars were building empires with his blueprints, Chris Lighty stood alone on his apartment patio, carrying a weight no platinum record could lift. This is the story of the quietest power player hip-hop ever knew, the man who taught 50 Cent to think like a corporation, who made Missy Elliott untouchable, who transformed street poets into brand moguls. But behind every deal he closed, behind every artist he elevated, there was a darkness growing, a pressure building, a price being paid that no one saw coming. If you love uncovering hidden legends like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to Legends Underrated, and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? May 8th, 1968. The Bronx River housing projects welcomed another child into a world that wasn't designed for dreaming. Daryl Stephen Lighty, who the world would come to know as Chris, arrived as the oldest of 6 children, born to a single mother who worked multiple jobs just to keep the lights on. When Chris was only 6 years old, his parents separated, thrusting him into a role no child should carry. He became the man of the house overnight, responsible for siblings who looked to him for protection in a neighborhood where protection was a luxury few could afford. His mother believed education was the escape route, so she enrolled him in a private school where he was often one of the only black faces in the classroom. Every day became a battle, literally. He'd come home with bruises, torn clothes, and a quiet pride that he'd survived another round. The other kids saw him as different, an outsider, but what they didn't understand was that this daily combat was forging something unbreakable inside him. He was learning to read people, to anticipate conflict, to navigate hostile environments with his mind as much as his fists. Outside those classroom walls, a different kind of education was unfolding. The Bronx in the 1970s wasn't just struggling, it was creating. Park jams erupted every summer night, DJs wiring turntables to lampposts, spinning vinyl until sunrise painted the sky. Young Chris stood in those crowds, watching Kool Herc and Africa Bambaataa transform pain into rhythm, struggle into celebration. For a kid who didn't have much, the music proved that something powerful could grow from nothing. When his mother remarried, Chris's world fractured again. The new husband brought violence into their home, and eventually, Chris's mother made the impossible decision to send him away to live with relatives. It was for his safety, but it felt like exile. Those years hardened him in ways school never could. He learned not to trust easily, not to depend on anyone, not to show weakness. But he also learned independence, resourcefulness, how to survive when the world offered no safety net. By the time he finished high school, Chris was a paradox, a young man with street instincts sharp as razors and an analytical mind that could have taken him anywhere. He studied electrical engineering briefly and landed steady work as an electrician for Metro North Railroad. It was honest work, reliable money, the kind of job his mother had prayed he'd find. But at night, the Bronx clubs called to him, pulling him back to that world of turntables and cipher circles, only now he saw it differently. This wasn't just music anymore. This was business waiting to be built, culture waiting to be legitimized, power waiting to be claimed. In the mid-1980s, a meeting changed everything. DJ Red Alert was already a legend in New York hip-hop circles. His radio show on Kiss FM, the heartbeat of the culture. Chris and his crew, young men who carried themselves with charisma and controlled danger, offered to help Red Alert carry his vinyl crates and provide security at his shows. It seemed simple enough, muscle work for a few dollars and proximity to the magic. But Red Alert saw something in Chris that others missed, a combination of street credibility and genuine intelligence, loyalty mixed with ambition. Red Alert was building something, and he needed people who understood both worlds, the raw authenticity of the streets and the emerging business structure of hip-hop. Chris fit perfectly. The crew earned a name that would echo through hip-hop history, the Violators. They weren't just bodyguards or roadies. They were the bridge between the chaos of the streets and the rising legitimacy of rap music. Everyone in New York knew them. If you disrespected Red Alert or one of his artists, the Violators would ensure you understood your mistake clearly and memorably. Chris became known as Baby Chris, partly because of his youthful face, partly because he was the youngest in the crew. But there was nothing childish about his ambition or his vision. He began handling logistics, managing relationships between artists and venues, ensuring shows ran smoothly. He was always observing, always learning how the machinery of this industry operated. Through Red Alert, Chris was introduced to the Native Tongues Collective, a revolutionary family of groups that included the Jungle Brothers, De La Soul, and a tribe called Quest. These weren't gangster rappers. They were philosophers, poets, innovators, who spoke about consciousness and creativity rather than violence. They needed someone who could protect them, represent them, and understand the art they were creating. Red Alert gave Chris his first major role, road manager for the Jungle Brothers. Suddenly, Chris was traveling, negotiating contracts, managing budgets, handling the complex logistics of tours. He wasn't on stage, but he controlled everything that made the stage possible. His calm under pressure, his ability to solve problems before they became crises, made him indispensable. By the late 1980s, his name was circulating through industry circles. On A Tribe Called Quest track, "What?" Q-Tip dropped a line that became part of hip-hop lore. What is Chris Lighty if he wasn't such a baby? It was an inside joke, but also a sign of respect. Baby Chris was the man keeping everything running, while others took the spotlight, and everyone who mattered knew it. But then came the night that forced him to choose between two worlds. Queen Latifah's birthday party in Manhattan, sometime in the late 1980s. It was the kind of event that brought hip-hop royalty together, celebration mixed with networking, music mixed with business. Chris arrived late with a friend, tried to skip the line, and the situation escalated quickly. Someone slashed Chris's face with a razor, blood poured, chaos erupted. Chris called in the Violators, and what happened next became legend for all the wrong reasons. By the time the violence ended, the entire club was destroyed. Tables overturned, glass shattered everywhere, people injured in the stampede to escape. Queen Latifah's own mother was hurt in the chaos. When the dust settled and Chris's face was bandaged, Lyor Cohen pulled him aside. Cohen was a rising executive at Def Jam, someone who understood both the culture and the corporate world Chris aspired to enter. His words were direct. If you want to make it in this business, you've got to leave the streets behind. Chris stood at a crossroads. He'd seen too many talented people fall to violence, too many promising careers destroyed by the code of the block. He'd watched neighborhoods bury their brightest because they couldn't let go of old feuds, old loyalties, old ways of settling disputes. The scar on his face would remain, but the man it belonged to would change. Baby Chris the fighter, the enforcer, the street soldier, began his transformation into Chris Lighty, the businessman, the deal maker, the power player who would reshape hip-hop's relationship with corporate America. He didn't just want to be part of the noise anymore. He wanted to be the man behind the machine, the strategist who elevated others while building something that would outlast any single artist or moment. The streets had taught him survival. Now he would learn empire building. By the mid-1990s, Chris Lighty had positioned himself perfectly. He'd worked under Russell Simmons and Lyor Cohen at Rush Management, the first major management company in hip-hop history. He'd managed tours, negotiated contracts, learned how executives thought and how corporations moved. But Rush Management was fracturing, being absorbed into Def Jam, and the artists were about to be scattered. Chris saw opportunity where others saw uncertainty. In 1996, he partnered with Mona Scott Young to co-found Violator Management. The name carried weight, paying homage to his street crew while signaling that this was something entirely new. Within months, they had assembled a roster that read like a hip-hop Hall of Fame: Busta Rhymes, A Tribe Called Quest, LL Cool J, and later Nas, Mobb Deep, Missy Elliott, and 50 Cent. But Chris wasn't interested in just booking shows and collecting percentages. He saw something that few others in hip-hop understood yet. These artists weren't just entertainers. They were brands waiting to be built, cultural forces that corporations would pay fortunes to access. He started small, but revolutionary. In 1997, he brokered LL Cool J's first Gap commercial, a collaboration that seemed impossible at the time. Hip-hop was still considered dangerous by mainstream America, something to be feared rather than embraced. But Chris understood that brands needed authenticity, and his artists had authenticity in abundance. The Gap deal opened doors. Soon, Chris was negotiating partnerships with Sprite for A Tribe Called Quest, Mountain Dew for Busta Rhymes, AT&T for younger artists like Diggy Simmons. Each deal wasn't just about money. It was about legitimacy, about proving that hip-hop artists could be corporate partners rather than just controversial figures in tabloids. Mona Scott Young brought her own brilliance to Violator, understanding image and marketing in ways that complemented Chris's strategic thinking. Together, they created something unprecedented: a management company that treated artists like Fortune 500 companies, complete with brand strategy, marketing campaigns, and long-term business planning. The industry noticed. Violator wasn't just representing artists, they were transforming them into multimedia empires. Stories like these are why I built Legends Underrated, so make sure to subscribe for more untold tales. But Chris's biggest move was still ahead, a deal that would change hip-hop's relationship with corporate America forever. The year was 2004, and Curtis Jackson, better known as 50 Cent, was already a phenomenon. His debut album, Get Rich or Die Trying, had sold millions. His beef with Ja Rule dominated headlines, and his partnership with Eminem and Dr. Dre gave him credibility across demographics. But Chris Lighty saw beyond the music. He saw a businessman trapped in a rapper's contract, a strategic mind that could understand brand building if given the right opportunity. When 50 Cent approached Chris about managing him, it wasn't just about booking tours or negotiating album deals. It was about reimagining what a rapper could become. Chris started having conversations with a small company called Glasso, which produced a drink called Vitamin Water. The brand was growing but needed the kind of cultural cachet that only hip-hop could provide. Most managers would have negotiated a standard endorsement deal. The artist appears in commercials, gets paid a flat fee, everyone moves on. Chris thought bigger. He structured a deal where 50 Cent didn't just endorse Vitamin Water, he became a partner, receiving equity in the company. 50 created his own flavor, Formula 50, and appeared in marketing campaigns. But more importantly, he owned a piece of what he was building. For 3 years, this seemed like a clever deal, a nice side hustle for a rapper who was already rich. And then, in 2007, Coca-Cola made an offer that validated everything Chris had been building toward. They purchased Glasso, Vitamin Water's parent company, for $4.1 billion. When the dust settled, 50 Cent walked away with approximately $100 million from the deal. Chris received an undisclosed sum that industry insiders estimated in the millions. It wasn't just a successful business deal. It was a statement, proof that hip-hop artists could negotiate as equals with global corporations, that they could build generational wealth through strategic partnerships rather than just album sales and touring. Chris had created a blueprint. Suddenly, every major artist wanted equity deals instead of endorsements. They wanted to own pieces of the companies using their images. They wanted to think like business people, not just performers. Chris had proven it was possible, and the entire industry shifted because of it. But success at this level comes with pressure, that few people understand, expectations that never stop growing, responsibilities that multiply with every victory. Chris Lighty's personal life was as complex as his professional empire. In 2003, he married Veronica, and together they had 2 children, a daughter named Deja and a son born in 2007. But Chris also had 4 other children from previous relationships, including a daughter named Tiffany. He was supporting multiple households, managing the emotional needs of 6 children, trying to be present, while building one of the most powerful management companies in entertainment history. The financial pressure was immense. Despite brokering deals worth hundreds of millions for his clients, Chris's own financial situation was precarious. By 2011, he owed the Internal Revenue Service approximately $5 million in back taxes. He'd invested in ventures that failed, including an energy drink company that never gained traction. He leveraged his success to build bigger dreams, but not all of them had materialized. That same year, Veronica filed for divorce. The marriage that had seemed solid was fracturing under the weight of his constant work, his divided attention, the pressure of maintaining an empire while managing personal relationships. Chris was the man everyone called when they had problems, the fixer who could solve any crisis. But he was drowning in his own. He sold a Manhattan property to resolve some of the tax issues, but other debts remained. Violator Management merged with Primary Wave to form Primary Violator, a move designed to stabilize and expand. But it also meant Chris was no longer the sole decision maker in the company he built. Friends later said he seemed overwhelmed, not by any single problem, but by the accumulation of them all. He was responsible for so many people: his artists, his employees, his children, his ex-wife, his mother, his siblings. Everyone needed something from Chris, and he'd built his entire identity on being the man who could handle everything, who never showed weakness, who always found solutions. But some problems don't have solutions you can negotiate. Some weight can't be carried, no matter how strong you've trained yourself to be. August 30th, 2012. A Thursday afternoon, in the South Riverdale section of the Bronx, Chris Lighty had been arguing with his wife, Veronica, at their apartment. Neighbors would later report hearing raised voices, the kind of domestic dispute that happens in struggling marriages everywhere. The details of that argument remain private, protected by the grief of those involved in the passage of time. What happened next sent shockwaves through the entire music industry. Chris was found on the patio of his apartment, lying face up with a 9mm pistol beside his body. He had suffered a gunshot wound to the head. He was 44 years old. The New York Police Department's initial investigation concluded that the death appeared to be self-inflicted. Forbes and other outlets reported the circumstances: the financial troubles, the divorce filing, the argument just before his body was discovered. It seemed like a tragic but understandable narrative, a successful man overwhelmed by personal and financial pressures, making a final, irreversible decision. But Chris's brother, Dave Lighty, immediately rejected the suicide ruling. So did many of Chris's closest friends and clients. They couldn't reconcile the man they knew, the problem solver, the strategic thinker, the person who always found a way forward, with someone who would take his own life. 50 Cent, who considered Chris more than a manager, more like family, was so convinced something was wrong that he hired a private investigation team at Chris's mother's request. The family launched their own independent inquiry, determined to find answers that made sense, to uncover what they believed the official investigation had missed. Rapper Papoose channeled his grief and suspicion into music, releasing Obituary 2012, a track that openly questioned whether Chris's death was really suicide. The song expressed what many in the community felt: confusion, disbelief, a sense that something didn't add up. The investigations, both official and private, never produced definitive evidence of foul play. No arrests were made. No alternative narrative was proven. The medical examiner's ruling stood, but the questions remain, hanging over Chris's legacy like storm clouds that never quite break. What's clear is that on that August afternoon, hip-hop lost one of its most visionary architects, and the people who love Chris lost someone irreplaceable, regardless of how he died. In the weeks and months after Chris's death, the hip-hop community engaged in a conversation it had long avoided. Artists like David Banner, Diddy, and LL Cool J began speaking openly about depression, pressure, and the silent battles successful black men face. For the first time, the culture that had always celebrated strength and invulnerability started acknowledging that success doesn't heal internal wounds, that money can't buy peace, that fame can actually increase isolation. Chris had spent his career making other people's dreams come true, but who was taking care of his dreams? Who was checking on the man everyone relied on? The tragedy forced an uncomfortable realization. The industry had created a system where people like Chris carried impossible burdens, where showing vulnerability was seen as weakness, where asking for help meant admitting failure. His death became a catalyst for change, slowly, imperfectly, but meaningfully. More artists began speaking openly about therapy, about mental health struggles, about the toll that constant pressure takes. Organizations formed to support entertainment professionals dealing with depression and anxiety. The conversation that Chris's death sparked may be the quietest but most profound part of his legacy. But the questions surrounding that August day never fully disappeared. Some people believe Chris was overwhelmed by financial and personal pressures and made a tragic decision in a moment of despair. Others remain convinced that something else happened, that the official narrative doesn't account for all the evidence, that Chris wouldn't have left his children and his life's work voluntarily. The truth, whatever it is, remains known only to those who were present that afternoon. What's undeniable is the impact Chris had on hip-hop, the blueprint he created, the doors he opened, the possibilities he proved existed. This twist shocked the world, and if you never want to miss stories like this, subscribe to Legends Underrated today. Chris Lighty's legacy isn't measured in gold records or Billboard charts. It's measured in every artist who demands equity instead of endorsement fees, every manager who thinks strategically about brand partnerships, every hip-hop act that negotiates with corporations as equals rather than supplicants. When Jay-Z built Roc Nation into a multimedia empire, he was walking a path Chris helped clear. When Drake negotiated his deal with Apple Music, he was using leverage Chris taught the industry to claim. When Travis Scott partnered with McDonald's and PlayStation, he was following a blueprint Chris drew in 2004 with 50 Cent and Vitamin Water. Mona Scott Young, Chris's partner at Violator, went on to create Love and Hip Hop, bringing hip-hop narratives to television audiences around the world. That success traces directly back to the foundation she and Chris built together, the understanding that hip-hop stories deserve to be told, that the culture's influence extends far beyond music. Before Chris, many black managers in hip-hop focused on survival, keeping their artists paid and protected in an industry that often exploited them. After Chris, the focus shifted to expansion, learning how to negotiate with billion-dollar corporations on equal terms, understanding that artists could build companies rather than just careers. He gave hip-hop legitimacy in corporate boardrooms, proving that rappers weren't risky investments, but cultural forces that brands needed. His approach wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't seek spotlight or credit. He worked in the background, strategizing, negotiating, building. But his impact was seismic, reshaping the entire business model of hip-hop and R&B. Today, when young managers study the industry, Chris's name still comes up, a quiet benchmark of integrity, vision, and strategic brilliance. In a business built on noise, Chris Lighty's power lived in his silence, in his ability to make things happen without needing recognition, in his focus on elevating others rather than promoting himself. He proved that real influence doesn't require headlines, that lasting change happens in boardrooms and contract negotiations rather than on social media. Some stars burn fast and fade quickly. Others fade slowly over time. But there are a few like Chris Lighty whose light doesn't fade at all. It simply moves into new spaces, illuminating paths for others to follow, opening doors that remain open long after the person who first opened them is gone. Chris Lighty's story isn't just about success or tragedy. It's about what it means to build something that outlasts your own life. He rose from the Bronx River housing projects, carried the weight of other people's dreams on his shoulders, and reshaped an entire culture without ever needing to stand in the spotlight himself. He believed that music wasn't just sound, but movement. That business wasn't just numbers, but storytelling. That loyalty, no matter how costly, was worth everything. Those beliefs guided him from the turntables of the 1980s to the boardrooms of the 2000s, from chaos to creation, from survival to legacy. But behind every deal he brokered and every empire he built, he was still human. A father, a friend, a man who felt deeply, who carried burdens others never saw, who struggled with demons that success couldn't silence. His life reminds us that even the strongest among us can fight quiet battles, that achievement doesn't always bring peace, that the people who seem most put together might be holding themselves together by sheer will. And yet, even in his absence, Chris continues to teach. Every time a young artist demands ownership of their brand, every time a manager stands up for fairness, every time hip-hop takes another step toward global influence and economic power, that's Chris's echo reverberating through the industry. His work lives not in headlines, but in the decisions made by those he inspired, in the standards he set, in the possibilities he proved existed. Maybe the question isn't what happened to Chris Lighty. Maybe it's what happened because of him. Because of Chris, the business of hip-hop became more than survival. It became self-determination. Because of Chris, artists learned that power doesn't always have to shout. Sometimes it simply signs the deal and walks away quietly. His story is a reminder that legacy isn't built through fame, but through faith. Faith in people, faith in dreams, faith in the belief that we can come from nothing and still change everything. If his story moved you, share it. If you remember him, speak his name. Stories like his deserve to live, not as mysteries, but as lessons about ambition, vulnerability, and the price of building empires. Tell me in the comments, what part of Chris's journey resonates with you most? And remember, some stars never fade. They just shine where fewer eyes can see, lighting paths for others brave enough to follow.